Thank you. Good morning. I'm only on day 4, so I have a lot of it. Day 1, so I have a lot of energy. Martin, I recognize being and feeling humbled a little bit because with all the PhD in the room you mentioned, I'm a university dropout. So I definitely haven't made my mom and dad proud. But what I have done, though, is I've spent 25 years, 2.5 decades, working in the advertising industry. And when I got this invite, I was like, that's an interesting invite. What can I possibly tell any of you? But then I thought, maybe I can actually learn something here today. Because usually, when you look at advertising, most people would probably say that is the one thing that is terrorizing them, right? My little niece, usually, when YouTube pops up with that little skip thing, she just called the little button there, skip advertising. So I think people fundamentally don't really like advertising these days. Keller Larson, the founder of Adbuster, said, fundamentally, advertising is probably the biggest psychological experiment ever carried out on human mankind. So obviously, our industry have immense power. $850 billion US were spent last year in terms of changing mindsets, behaviors. My focus have been sustainability, climate, ESG, diversity and inclusion. And one thing I have experienced there right now is an extremism, is a divide, is an infighting. So I'm really seeing a value class in my industry that I have never experienced before. So I'll try and take you on that journey and hopefully share some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. And I think basically it also comes a little bit back to the leadership. One thing my industry haven't been very good at is leadership. We failed on social media. I think we had a real opportunity in terms of guiding people, creating guardrails. We haven't succeeded. Now we're faced with artificial intelligence. Hollywood stood up and at least tried to do something with the writers protesting. I haven't really seen our industry do anything around AI, even though it is a threat to a lot of the brands and the companies that I work with. And I don't really see a lot of leadership on climate. So when you say, are you successful? Would Dash be scared if they were sitting in this room? In many circumstances, I would say that my industry, on some of the biggest topics that we've been up against, haven't been very successful. Take smoking. Have you really won that fight as an advertising industry? Even though we claim that we have. No, not really. We just got people away from sort of combustible cigarettes to nicotine products. That's on the rise. And overall, we see more people smoking. Climate, how is that going? Not great, huh? So one of the things, as I said, that I witnessed that's hurtful is that when brands these days invest in taking a stance, invest in maybe making us think about race, diversity, biases. Companies like Nike, who's done it for decades, trying to give us a sense of maybe this is not just about buying a sneaker, maybe this is about a bigger thing, a bigger mission. So they talk about believing something, even if it means sacrificing everything and showcasing. I'm not very good with American football, I gotta admit that. But apparently he's a very famous American football player taking a stance for diversity and what he believed in. He got kicked out. So when Nike does that, people's response was this: burning their sneakers. So just simple advertising messages can right now really piss people off. There's a case, and I see it daily now. I saw a case the other day, some of you might have followed it. Justin Sides, who used to be the former CEO of Puma, went to another American legacy brand, Harley Davidson. Quite an interesting brand with an interesting customer base. And so what Justin Sides did was basically implementing some pretty simple diversity and inclusion courses within the company, which most people would say is sort of baseline work, kind of like a hygiene factor, right? And, you know, when you look at the crowd of the Harley Davidson people, you would think that they're not your usual kind of guys. You would think that they would probably appreciate a little bit of diversity and inclusion. That really made them angry. One guy got so angry, so he found his whole weaponry, his whole arsenal of machine guns, pump guns, pistols, hand grenades, and literally killed his Harley Davidson. Coming from an industry where I'm supposed to build brands, this is not great. So what I'm seeing right now is just simple messaging right now is getting people so angry. This is something that's happened within the last 5 to 10 years. And it's happening on a daily basis. A lot of that, obviously, we can look to the US, we can shake our heads and think they're just crazy over there. But it's slowly also happening, even in countries like Denmark, where I'm from. Things like pride. People can get angry now around pride in Denmark, which, why? So there is an extremism happening. So I started to try and ask myself the question, why is that? Are we taking the wrong approach in advertising? So I'm going to show you 2 ads here. One I just showed you before from Nike, and another one I went back in the archives all the way back to United Colors of Benetton. Some of you might remember some of those early campaigns. Yeah, a little bit of recognition there. For me, it is still probably a highlight of what our industry did. But just to kind of test the room now a little bit, which ad do you like? And let's do a very simple one. You just let me see how we can do it. Just point in a direction. So those who like the Nike one, point in that direction. Those who like the United Colors of Benetton ad, point in the other direction. Let's see some hands here. Great, okay, the room is not agreeing, which is kind of great. There's hands both sides, which is fine. That is what communication is about, right? You know, we don't have to agree on everything. Where I stand on this is probably that I tend to like what United Colors of Benetton is doing. And why is that? Because they don't go down the path of a value crusade, of saying, we stand on this high horse, we believe in this. But hopefully the ad makes us think about our own values and about our own biases. And so I think fundamentally, that is where we need to rethink our leadership, not by preaching, but actually about helping people transform, change, challenge them. And there are so many things right now where I think we have gotten a lot of this wrong. As I said, my journey started back in 2009 because we were hosting the Climate Summit in Copenhagen. And obviously I had very high expectations of our elected leaders to do something about the climate crisis. And they sort of came out of that. Not a lot. So that was the beginning of my first book, Good Advertising, back in 2010. Very early days, less gray hair. Back then, this approach was a little bit more successful. So when Nike and some of these brands tried to talk about these things, we didn't see the same divide. But today, there is something in that methodology that just doesn't work anymore. So I had to think maybe the way that we go about leadership is fundamentally wrong. Because brands, companies used to have this tendency about going out and saying, look at us, our products are the best in the world, the best at making our teeth shine white or whatever it might be. When it came to sort of the world bettering messaging, sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, they went down the same path and they said, we're also the best in the world. It's not a very believable argument. And what it also tends to do is it becomes very much of a value crusade. So I had to write a second book that said, basically, maybe what we got wrong is we are making the brands the hero rather than actually making people the hero. So how can we change that sort of narrative? And also because when we look at changing behaviors, most of the time, when we talk about these things, when we talk about sustainability, climate, diversity, and inclusion, most of the time people say, oh, yes, I want to buy that fair trade chicken. But when we really sort of look at what they end up doing, obviously most people fail to do so, and especially when other people aren't watching. So there's a gap of the people who say they want to do something and they believe in this and that, but only 26% follow through. So there's a gap of 39% here. I'm sure you have similar numbers from your field. So I thought, how can I sort of figure out that little gap of 39%? What is the little magic thing there? And so I started to look to psychotherapy and coaching to understand this thing. And very early on, I found, wait a moment, what if we start behaving more like a coach? As somebody who understands people, who put ourselves in people's shoes and say, hey, I get you. Take cigarette smoking. I just talked about how not successful we've been as an industry. Even if you look at the current way of putting these sort of cancer-ridden lungs in the packaging, I don't know if there's any smokers in the room. What happens fundamentally is you avoid the campaign, not the cigarettes. Exactly the same thing is happening with climate campaigning. The world is going under. We can't relate to that. We ignore the campaign and we keep driving our SUV. So we need a different approach. Most of the time, some of the most successful work I've seen in the anti-smoking space has been around showing understanding, being insightful around some of the challenges smokers are facing. Let's be real, if you're in the UK and you smoke during winter, it's not fun anymore. It's not fun being outside in the cold with the few colleagues who are still left. You kind of feel a little bit more alienated than when I, back in my days, were in school and all the cool kids were smoking inside, right? So try and show a little bit of understanding. It's not very fun to be outside here. So try to kind of find some of those insights. So the methodology I created to sort of take that approach has, and I'm not going to go through this one today, ask one fundamental question. Who can you help people become? How can you help people on their journey of change? The biases, the challenges, all these things that they're faced with on a daily basis. I'm going to show you some examples soon. And I could give you one example of a company who's doing that pretty well. Oatly, an oat milk brand from Sweden from 1970, believe it or not. Back then, it was probably only long-haired, blonde Swedes living somewhere in the forest, eating plant-based, who was drinking that stuff. Today, they've been pretty successful in getting most of us to at least consider going from cow milk to oat milk. So they've taken a different approach. They fundamentally want to tell us there is an alternative in a clever way. Here, they challenge the dairy industry and say, show us your carbon footprint. So quite a clever approach. The interesting thing about that is, being in the climate space, obviously, I want to do my thing. You know, I feel bad about being in an airplane, etc. So I also embrace plant-based cooking. And so when you have someone like Oatly who inspires me to do that, people don't actually have to pay me to influence other people. So I do it voluntarily, because when I'm home, I'd start doing that nice vegan pie. I'll share that on social media to all my friends and network, right? Obviously, the reality probably looks a little bit more like this. But it's sort of anchoring yourself into people's stories, into people's narratives, who you want them to become. So that's the first thing, ultimately figuring out how we change the leadership, how we change the narrative. When we do that, we're also much more successful. So we analyzed together with GfK 20 campaigns who took a more like a Nike approach to this. We believe in this. You should do this. Or campaigns who took more the transformative approach, like United Colors of Benetton. Maybe have a think about this. The interesting things here inspires me to be part of the change. 10% of people. So people feel more motivated. And so that brings me to another analogy here, the climate change, as we talked about. And as I said, as an industry, we haven't been very successful. The only time I've actually seen us have a little bit of success in changing any behaviors was obviously COVID. COVID is probably the first time we saw behavior change at large scale across the globe, right? Unfortunately, I thought that would stick, but obviously we're back at square one again. We're back at the old habits. So it's fundamentally really, really difficult to change behaviors and mindsets. So as I said, one thing, and I think, Martin, you touched in on it a little bit as well, that how do we need to rethink this? And I think fundamentally it's understanding the challenges that a lot of these people live, the everyday struggle that they're faced with. I'm going to show you a very old ad. It's an ad that's penned by one of the forefathers of great advertising, David Ogilvy. At 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this new Rolls Royce comes from the electric clock. Why is that a great ad? It's a great ad because the dear old David Ogilvy wouldn't have been able to know that unless he'd been driving that Rolls Royce for a very long time and finding that little insight, that little clever insight. And that little clever insight is so pivotal. Really understanding your target group is so fundamental. It's so basic, but it's so fundamental. Let me give you an example. Let's stay in the world of smoking because it's a good analogy in terms of changing behaviors. So young people, what do they not fear? They don't fear death because when you're young, you are invincible, absolutely invincible. So why are the cigarette industry talking about you might die or you're going to live 7 years less or whatever? Who cares? When you're young, you're not afraid of dying, fundamentally. The cigarette industry has also tried other things. You know, your teeth is going to turn yellow and sort of try and talk a little bit about vanity. One of the most interesting campaigns I've seen that I really liked was that they took the anger that a lot of young people have against institutions and many other things there, and then they turned it against the cigarette industry in itself. So they created a campaign where they motivated young people to say, wait a moment, you're not fighting the cigarettes. You're actually fighting an industry that's out there to kill you, to hurt you. So they gave them another fight. They gave them another enemy, which I thought fundamentally was a very, very clever tactic. And they got a lot of people involved, staging a real-life protest outside the cigarette industry's headquarters, putting body bags in front of that headquarters. So suddenly they had something new to fight, and they could fight, and they could find other allies in that fight. I'm going to show you another example, because quite often, one of the things when we remove all the values and status and all of that stuff that I found over the years is that three things that always work, and now we talk in the world of commerce: price, quality, and convenience. Price, quality, and convenience. But you can equate that to even your topic as well. People not having a lot of money to live for. How convenient do they have access to X, Y, Z? So if you're in the US and you want to teach young people to eat better and eat more healthy, that's quite a battle. I don't know if any of you ever gone to a school in the US. It's a lot of fast food, let's be honest. I mean, Jamie Oliver at least tried in the UK to pick up that fight here, right? But so how fundamentally do you win over people to eat something as simple as snack carrots? Again, what if you apply the same tactics that the candy, the snack industry does, and then you make it convenient? So a very, very easy way of giving people an alternative to this and saying, actually, you could also grab a bag of snack baby carrots. They're really tasty. They're really lovely. And the packaging, they even created a packaging that kind of looked like everything you used to from Mars, from Cadbury's. So very, very similar way of sort of showing up, kind of a little bit like the enemy. So all these years I'm trying to come up with a model I wanted to sort of simplify these things and say, okay, first of all, it's about the leadership. Who can you help people become? So what are the battles, challenges that people are faced with? Then how can you make it life-centric? How can you enable a difference in my life? Maybe about inspiring healthier eating habits. The benefits, what is my benefits? Again, price, quality, and convenience. Can you make it more convenient for people? And lastly, when and where? This especially, I think, is key to most communication. My industry is often so obsessed with the bigger changes. But if you ask yourself, what's the right time and place where I'm most likely to act on the message? That might not necessarily be on TikTok or Instagram or on YouTube. How can you think differently about these messages? Think back to the little baby carrots example. How clever that was at the very moment where you have to choose between the candy bar and something healthier. Let me give you a very, very quick example for somewhere completely different. Food waste. A lot of people will talk about food waste. You're being bombarded daily about food waste advertising from a lot of retailers today. This I really thought was very clever. So just a little sticker on an avocado or banana. I don't know what happened with the young generation today, but people don't know how to cook. Something went wrong, right? People can't tell if a banana, if it's just a little bit brown, people throw it away. So this is very clever. You look at the banana. If it's too green, you can fry it. If it's almost walking out of that little fruit bowl, it's actually really good for cupcakes, or I like to make pancakes out of it. So just this little sticker, very, very clever at the exact time. So it's not about creating a big TVC campaign about trying to change people's behaviors, inspiring people for that change at the right time. And let me give you another example, which is very much about benefit when we talked about quality. Fundamentally, if you want people to eat more organics, so organic produce in Denmark, we're the world champions in eating most organic, milk, dairy, all this stuff. But if you don't want to go down the climate route and say to people, you should eat organic because it's, good for the planet, because that's not a very convincing argument. How do you find something that's even more convincing, that talks about quality in a completely different way? So what they did here was they created a test. They took a family, gave them whatever regular food they'd be eating. And obviously when you do that, you can actually check the levels of pesticides and insecticides in our bodies. Shame, I ruined your lovely breakfast there this morning. But those levels are there. They're not just disappearing. Then they gave them a meal of only organic, and obviously they see these levels drop very, very quickly. So bringing a health argument, a quality argument to the table, not about saving the world, saving the planet, or anything like that, but about your own health. So let me end on the climate crisis here. As I said, we live in an extremely divided world at the moment. And I think in my world, unfortunately, a lot of brands are daily put on the front cover, are daily risking their revenue, their brands, because they try and advocate for something that is pretty simple, right? Basic human rights. And people hate them for it. So they fundamentally need to change the way that they show up in the world. In my pastime, when I don't have to put on my professional hat and advise companies in strategic communication, I always love to talk to other people. And that's also why I love to be here today. And so I have a podcast called Climate Punk, where I talk to a lot of different people in the climate space. And one of the people I talk to is this guy here, Chris Jordan. And you might know him by his face, but you might know this image that he took back in 2006 on Midway Island. Basically, albatrosses suffocating in ocean plastics. An image that got famous worldwide and sort of got the ocean plastic conversation up to the very forefront. Chris has been advocating for change for 10, 15 years. And then I caught up with him in the podcast Climate Punk. And he showed his work through all those years and his advocacy. And then he showed me this recent project. And I asked Chris, So what is this about? Is this about rising ocean levels? You know, it's dystopian world. He said, no. He now lives in southern Chile. And he said, no, this is basically just a beautiful portrait of the Chilean nature. So hopefully when you see that, you'd fall in love with nature and the surrounding beauty. I said, hey, why? He said, I realized that 15 years of activism haven't changed anything. Because the only thing people do is they just shut off. But what if I can take something and make people fall in love with that? And then hopefully I can get them to protect it. And I think that's ultimately what we need to do today. My industry haven't been successful. Right now, we're desperate from what you guys are doing here today, a more multidisciplinary approach. We need to learn from each other. We need to learn from each other. These very, very difficult topics. We can't all succeed by doing what we've done repetitively in the last 10, 15, 20 years and not succeeding. We should have solved the climate crisis issue right now. We should have gotten people motivated, yet we do actually see quite the opposite. On diversity and inclusion, you can say some things are going forward, but we're also seeing a much more divided society. So I fundamentally believe that the best kind of leadership is those who make us achieve great things. So we need to give people a sensible alternative. We need to support them on that journey because the protests out there are real. People are getting angry. And so the one thing about behavior change I think I've learned is that, and we talked about cigarettes earlier, if you want to change behaviors, the thing is, and quit cigarettes, for example. Your loved ones can tell you to quit the cigarettes. Your doctor can try and tell you probably shouldn't be smoking. Packaging can try and scare you, but ultimately the only one who can create that change is yourself. So we need to create those people, those campaigns that insightfully motivate people to do so. And then the last thing I want to share is I was walking around in the city of Copenhagen in the summer, and I came across this little poster from the city of Copenhagen. I don't expect you guys to read Danish, so you'd have to trust me. The poster just simply states, it's okay to disagree. That's the message of the city of Copenhagen to all its citizens. It's okay to disagree. And why I want to end up with that little message is that sometimes I think the challenge is that we end up going on some sort of value crusade. And when you sort of try to fly like a Superman, you will fall down like a can of soup at some point. So I think we need to think about the United Colors of Better Tongue approach, where people get challenged, they get their views challenged, and then hopefully we're there to insightfully support them on that journey towards change. That's all I had to say to you here today from some years of doing communication. So thank you so much.